Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Roy, and I'm the college's Chief Diversity Officer. My gender pronouns are she and her. Welcome to Our Voices, LGBTQ plus students and alumni perspectives. In this panel, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer students and alumni will share their thoughts about the pursuit of equal treatment, intersectionality, and RCC's campus climate. Through the Our Voices panel discussions, we aim to empower marginalized communities, create greater understanding among the campus community, and address inequities. We received great feedback from our first 3 discussions. I anticipate another eye-opening discussion today. Before we continue, I will remind you to please remain muted until asked to speak. If you have questions, there will be an opportunity to ask them later in the program. Feel free to ask questions using the chat function at any time. We are recording today's program and we'll post it on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion website. Now I will turn the program over to Dr. Katie Lynch, the chair of the Sam Draper Honors Program and Associate Professor of English, who is serving as the moderator for today's discussion. Katie?
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Melissa. And thank you also to Strategic Marketing for being behind the scenes and making this happen. And of course, thank you to our panelists. It's just so wonderful to have some alumni who have returned to join us today, as well as some current students to speak about their experiences. So I'm really thrilled and just very excited for this conversation. Please, audience, thanks so much for making the time for this. Do put any questions you have in the chat, and there will be an opportunity for you to unmute as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. So I have a Brady Bunch Squares view here, and so I will call on each in turn. And then as you introduce yourself, you can let us know, what you're studying or what you studied at RCC, if you're an alum, where you transferred, and if you wish, how you identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. And once we've done some introductions, then we'll move on to some questions. Okay. You may also notice, audience, that most of us have put our pronouns into our names for today. And if you want to do the same, it's actually quite easy to do. If you move your mouse to the top corner of your little square, you see an ellipsis, 3 dots, and you can go down and rename yourself, and you can very easily put your pronouns into your name. And that's actually a really helpful strategy to make sure that we can address you appropriately in the way that you want to be known. So I'm going to start with Asad. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, no problem. So can everyone hear me all right? I'm trying out the whole AirPod thing.
We can.
Anyhow. So my name is Asad Shirazi. I was at RCC from I think 2016 to 2018. While I was there, I was on the humanities and liberal arts track, I believe. And after that, I transferred to Johns Hopkins University. And there I was in a program called Medicine, Science, and the Humanities, which is kind of like a bridge between some sciencey stuff, some humanities-based things, all kind of under this medical theory umbrella. And my concentrations were in English and art history. I graduated in May of 2020. It's almost a year, which is kind of crazy. And since then, I stayed at Hopkins. I'm working at the School of Public Health as a budget analyst and a research assistant at the Center for American Indian Health. It's been cool. So I identify as gay and queer. And for those who don't know, queer is kind of like, it's an umbrella term for maybe if you don't exactly identify as straight or just kind of like a cisgendered individual. That's kind of almost like a banner term, but to each person it might mean something different. But yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Jordan, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Jordan. I am in my last semester at RCC. I'm studying photography, and I identify as a transgender man and as pansexual.
Great. Would you mind quickly just telling us how you define pansexual? That may be a term that some of our audience members aren't familiar with.
Mm-hmm. So for me, pansexual means that I am attracted to people regardless of their gender. While gender does factor in somewhat to my attraction to people, I don't have limitations on who I'm attracted to based on what their gender is.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Jose, you're next.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? My name is Jose Mazariego. I graduated RCC in 2018. I graduated with an AS in Business Administration, and then I transferred to Baruch College to study statistics and quantitative modeling. I identify as gay, and I'm currently in the process of applying to graduate school in public health. And that's basically everything you need to know about me.
Well, Jose, there's so much more, but we'll take it
Yes,
for
I
now.
know.
Wonderful, and good luck with those grad school applications. Emily, you're next.
Hi, I'm Emily. I went to RCC 2014 to 2016, which feels like forever ago now. And I'm actually now an adjunct professor at RCC, which is fun. So I can bring in a little bit of instructor perspective today as well. I transferred to Fordham University after I graduated, and then I did my master's at the University of Toronto in English, I forgot to mention. So yeah, my concentration is English, specifically medieval literature, because of Dr. Lynch. And I identify as a bisexual woman.
Fantastic, thank you. And Marie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Marie. I am currently a returning adult student at RCC, and I'll be graduating in the spring in liberal arts with a concentration in English. And I identify as bi/pansexual. And I put my pronouns she, her, they, which I kind of recently sort of came into, only because I am mostly kind of feminine presenting and stuff like that, but I just don't feel like I felt like I needed more room because my gender expression is kind of more expansive. So, and to me, bisexual means that you're attracted to either or all genders. So I just say bi and pansexual because I know some people see a lot of difference between those two, but for me, they're kind of almost synonymous. So.
Excellent. That really helps. Thank you so much for adding those details about how you identify it and sort of where that comes from. I really appreciate that. And I'm guessing we'll have more questions later about that if you'd like to weigh in. And certainly last but not least, Matt, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Baker, and I'm a sophomore at RCC, and my major is cybersecurity. I identify as queer.
Fantastic. We're so glad you're here. So current students, welcome, alumni, welcome back. Let's get into some questions. So the first question that I have for you all today is how do you feel, what are the ways in which RCC does a good job of supporting LGBTQ plus students? Let's focus on the positive first. What does our college do a good job of doing? And then if you'd like, if you've had experience at another college, you can also add some things in from that other perspective. Anybody who would like to answer, take it away.
I guess I could go first. Okay, so I remember when I first got to RCC, I was still pretty closeted. I mean, from most people, I wasn't really telling people, strangers and people I didn't know just yet. But my experience had been that I had never really seen professional people, LGBTQ people, in positions of leadership or of high academic standing. And I kind of had this realization that I think I almost didn't think that was even possible for a lot of queer people. So it was so great to see queer faculty members, other queer people in positions of leadership and visibility. I think for young people in general who are kind of in that college, high school age, when you're kind of trying to figure things out, it's really important to see that kind of at the start of, I guess, a career and academic pursuit. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to speak to that question about what do you think RCC or another college you've attended has done well? Go ahead, Jose, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, so I came out when I was a senior in high school, so that year was a very difficult year for me. And then transferring to college, it was a time for me to experiment and experience how RCC was, you know, being more LGBTQ friendly. There were a lot of events that I saw and I really attended because I was still a little bit, not in the closet, I would say, but I still a little bit not as involved in the LGBT community as I am now. There were a lot of events like National Coming Out Days or drag shows, Second Chance Prom, or like discussions on what does it mean to be trans inclusive, right? And those were things that a lot of RCC students were attending and were kind of becoming more friendly towards the LGBT community. I also attended some support groups that were led by Dr. Lynch and other faculty members, where students just discussed basically what the school could do better, what was going on in our community, what was going on in politics, what was going on in Brooklyn or in the state. And it was an amazing experience for me. And it was a process for me to become more and more involved in the community. And then, attending Pride and all those things that I never really thought I would do back in senior year high school when I first came out.
That's wonderful. And I know we're all anxious for Pride to become a thing that we can go to again someday soon, we hope. Anyone else want to take on that question?
I will.
Sure.
So for me, when I first came onto campus for RCC in person before COVID, it was very refreshing. I felt very welcomed in a place just to be. I met so many people from different backgrounds who was a part of the community, but still had a different background. And also, I think it's also the professors in my book, because a lot of them were understanding and open-minded about it.
I'm very glad to hear that. That's wonderful. Anyone else want to chime in on this one?
I also agree with pretty much everything that's been said so far. Was similar to my experience. I was also closeted. I was questioning at the time, so I was kind of closeted to myself as well. And being in that environment that felt like if I had understood my sexuality and decided to come out, it would have been safe to do so, was really important, particularly for anybody who doesn't feel comfortable doing so at home or like truly expressing their identity at home or in other spaces. If you do at least feel that comfort at school, that's like a game changer for a lot of people. So I think it probably contributed to me eventually starting to come out once I got to Fordham, because I had that experience at RCC.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. And I think you're right. The idea that maybe being at home, that's not a safe space, but when you can go to school, if that is a safe space, at least there you feel seen and recognized. And that's really wonderful. Marie, I saw that you had unmuted before. Did you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, sure. I kind of had some similar experiences. I just having friends there and feeling more open, I guess, because it was college and it seemed more free. But also I would say probably the first gender studies class I took, I think it was Women, Men, Sex and Power. And that class was wow, like eye opener, like, okay, like adults are thinking about these things too, like older people, they're going through things, and we can discuss them in the world and how they impact us. It's not something that you have to go through alone, kind of. And also like giving names to things and learning, that helped a lot.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that part of the curriculum was useful to you too. That's really great to hear. So I think we can move on at this point. My next question has to do not with a specific place, but with challenges in general. So what kinds of challenges do you feel that LGBTQ plus students experience in a college environment? And if you've experienced some of these challenges, feel free to elaborate in detail. But generally speaking, what are the challenges? We've heard some of the positives. What gets in your way? What are some of the obstacles that come along with being a part of this community as you're trying to be a college student? Go ahead, Jordan.
I think that specifically something that's a challenge right now for a lot of people is not being able to be on campus and having to be at home and often in unsupportive environments. Because for a lot of people, going to college and being on campus was kind of their break from being in a toxic or unsupportive environment. So now that people were forced to be at home all the time, it causes a decline in people's mental health.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I really appreciate that you brought it up. It can be very challenging to even talk about this aspect of your identity if your home life is not supportive, because you're at home all the time. You don't have a safe way to talk about that, right? So thank you. Any other challenges that you think? Go ahead, Jose.
I was just gonna talk about, because like Jordan said about depression, right? We see that there's studies throughout the US that found that LGBTQ youth has an increased risk of depression, right, compared to heterosexual teenagers. And the difficult part is, of course, there's a lot of discrimination in the mental health industry when it comes to LGBTQ youth. And there, at the same time, we're trying to overcome the stigma of mental health, and at the same time overcoming the stigma of being LGBTQ, right? Because, for example, in my family, being gay or being bi is still considered a mental health issue. That is not normal, and it's still a mental health issue, right? And at the same, and overcoming the stigma of being gay, and at the same time overcoming the stigma of facing depression or anxiety because of the of issues within your communities or within your families is one of the biggest issues that I think I faced in my life.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you talked about the intersection of, having queer identity, and then also a lot of the increased risk for mental health, issues that are coming along with that, and how difficult it is to parallel process there. Anyone else want to speak to some of the challenges? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think going back to the, I guess the issue of visibility, I guess back to my own experience as well. I think there is such a lack of representation of queer voices. I think in the media, I think nowadays it's gotten much better in that way, but I think just in professional sectors, in academia, whatever, it's really hard to find those strong leadership type voices unless you go looking for it. So I know that when I started my career, and my college career, my actual career, to this day, it's still a really, it's a difficult process to kind of validate your own contributions, because you don't know if it belongs, right? And I suppose that kind of contributes to a certain stereotype or kind of perpetual view of gay people, that somehow they're less valuable. I remember I requested a recommendation letter to one of my professors when I was transferring. And, I think one of queer people's greatest, strengths really is what we go through when, we're in the process of affirming who we are and all that stuff. So anyways, it was part of my transfer application. I've written it into my personal statement, whatever. The professor who wrote my recommendation letter, I think chose some poor words, but said that they had left out the issue of my being gay from their letter to kind of keep it quote unquote clean. And so the idea is that by expressing who you are or being who you are is somehow a detriment to your professional career, your academic career. And in a lot of cases, it is kind of scary. It is kind of dangerous, because in some places we don't necessarily have all those protections, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that anecdote. The word clean, did that really rub you the wrong way? Keeping it clean, as though, because of course the opposite of clean is dirty, and that's a word that has been used against us and continues to be, right?
Right. The sentiment was that if, you know, I included that in my application, that would somehow kind of sully the kind of message that I was trying to bring, or somehow, you know, reduce the work that I'd put in for 2 years. You know, that's an issue.
Right. Whereas, in fact, you had done your research, as I know you did, right? You had done your research on how those schools did regard the LGBTQ plus community. You'd seen that they were all very supportive, that they had student clubs and organizations and initiatives. So you could be confident that, you know, acknowledging your identity, that part of your identity in your application was actually a good idea, that it was a strong idea for you to do. But unfortunately, you didn't receive the same from one of your faculty members who was writing a letter. So that's hard. Thank you for sharing that with us.
I'd like to just add really quickly that just for, you know, young people, a lot of schools do understand the strength that it takes to be who an LGBTQ person is. So it's actually not a bad thing. It's not.
Absolutely. And easily found with research now. Now that everything's online, right? You can easily find how a school regards, you know, somebody's sexual orientation or other aspects of your identity. Yeah. Any other comments on the challenges that come with being a queer college student? Oh, Marie, go ahead.
I would say the stigma is kind of bad. Being like a bisexual female, like, or like a young woman, people obviously like have a lot of preconceived notions about that. I think they do about everybody. And I think that, you know, like probably like right now, like transgender people and like transgender people of color need the most support. I'm just gonna throw that out there because they go through the most oppression in their lives, all of the things that they have to deal with. But I would just, as being that as my identity, almost didn't even want to use that word because I heard it used so many times as like an exploitive thing or a thing where people just think like that it means promiscuity or something like that. So there's a lot of things like that. And I think, especially in the college setting, it's not really taken seriously. So even though like I knew that that was my identity, I kind of didn't even want to like embrace that or say that out loud during like my younger years, when I was going to college for the first time. Now that some years have gone by, I'm kind of like, you know, older and like, well, I don't care what you think, I am who I am. But I do think it's hard when you're younger to have that confidence. It doesn't just happen automatically. So it takes a while, and it takes, you know, like peers and friends and the support groups, I think or at least like talking to somebody and having support to understand that.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And that's really important. I want to pick up on something that a few of you have said today about other aspects of identity. How do you feel like other aspects of your identity, whether that is race and ethnicity, whether that's, you know, socioeconomics, class, anything else, religion, right? How do you feel that that intersects with your identity as an LGBTQ plus person? And what are the, you know, the challenges that may come along with that, if you want to speak to that, or some of the wonderful intersectionalities that we can celebrate? Any thoughts on, you know, how this one part of you intersects with other parts of you?
I can talk a little bit about that because there was a fellowship that I was applying to where my essay was specifically about my racial, how being a racial minority and being an ethnic minority too, and also being LGBTQ presented challenges, right? And there's a lot of things, like, for example, we see that racial and ethnic minorities to which one belongs also affects how we identify in the process of coming out, in the process of the available support that there is, and to the extent of to which one identifies with the LGBTQ community and also participates in the community. right? Like I mentioned before, I have a lot of family members who openly attack LGBTQ persons and people on social media or even in my own house, right? And we see that a lot of people might face differences because of being from a specific group, right? Being, for example, I am an immigrant from El Salvador, a country that, even though it's not illegal to be gay, it is very frowned upon. People don't like it. Most of the people there are Christians. My family is Christian. And coming out, I lacked a lot of the support that I needed in order to advance. I was lucky enough to find amazing role models, RCC, even at Baruch College and even other places. But I think that's one of the major things that affected me in my life, being part of a minority, being an immigrant and Hispanic, and at the same time being part of the LGBTQ community. It just completely put me in a position where I needed to overcome so many challenges in order to go to college, in order to graduate from a 4-year school. I'm the first one in my family to ever go to college or even high school at this point. And I think that those challenges, even though they really, really affected me, I became someone who just accepted being gay, accepted being an immigrant, accepted being part of the Hispanic community, and overcame those challenges with the help of amazing faculty members and role models that I had throughout my life.
Thank you so much for that answer. You know, I know it's hard. It's hard to talk about these extra obstacles that stand in front of us. Does anyone else want to speak to this?
I can kind of continue off of what Jose was saying. I have had similar situations with my family. I grew up in a very insular Jewish community. I didn't really know what any queer stuff was until I was like 15. So for me, it was less of like people thought negatively about it and more of like it just wasn't a thing. No one talked about it at all. So coming out was fairly difficult in my family. I mean, my mom still doesn't really believe that I'm trans, and she like blames it on any possible slight bad thing that could have happened at any point in my life, and is like, oh yeah, that's what it is. You can't possibly be trans and come from a good family and all that stuff. So it definitely impacted my experience coming out and you know, figuring out who I was.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and it is really hard when a family member continues to not accept you and also is treating this as though it's something wrong or bad when actually it's something about yourself that you celebrate, and that disconnect is very jarring. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on this particular question, on the intersectionality that we see here, right, between other aspects of our identity and being queer? Go ahead, Asad.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I can speak a little bit closer to sexual orientation, but I think there's an expectation that a queer person, gay person, might kind of have to compartmentalize these things in their lives, that being gay is just about who you like, but a lot of times it interacts with all these facets of who you are and your personality, you know, your background. And so it's there. I mean, all I can say about it is really that they're just really interconnected things, and each person has their own journey and their own story, definitely. But it's kind of a culmination of all of those things. You know?
Right. That it's not it's not necessarily the kind of thing that we can silo away, that it all combines and it's always sort of bubbling together and affecting our decisions, the obstacles that stand in our way, the opportunities that we have. All of this is in play at the same time. Wonderful. Anyone else?
I just want to add something
Sure.
a little bit about health outcomes that we face because of being part of the LGBTQ community and being a racial minority. We see that marginalized communities like Hispanics, African Americans, LGBTQ communities have a difficult access to healthcare and quality education or a good, healthy food, which is one of the main problems in the country, right? Obesity. And being part of marginalized communities not only affects us personally as in challenges, but it also affects our health outcomes and the health of our children's and grandchildren's. And there's something in epidemiology that looks at how one factor affects health outcomes, but then putting all the different factors together creates a bigger outcome, a bigger disparity in health, right? And it's not, and it's something that's very difficult to change, but it is possible, right? And that's one of the things that I've been always, doing research on, and on how being part of the LGBTQ community affects health, how being part of how being an immigrant affects my health, and being part of a Hispanic community affects my health too, right? And all those things together can create a big effect if we don't do something to change how we see these different factors.
So well said. Thank you for that, and thank you for the research you're doing. I know this is going to be what you do, right? This is what you're going to grad school for, and that's really exciting. So let's talk about what needs to change. Just pick up on what Jose said. So let's start with RCC. What do you wish had been different? Or if you're a current student, what do you wish were different now? What do we need more of? What do we need less of? What kind of ways do people need to change the way they think or the way they talk around campus or in classrooms? What are the challenges here in our community that you have witnessed?
I have a thought on this. It's actually more from an instructor perspective, but I don't know if anyone who is trans, who's been a student, can relate to this. I have noticed that trans students are sometimes dead named on their documentation. Anyone who's not familiar with that, that means that if a trans person chooses to change their name, and you call them by their former name that they were assigned at birth, it's called dead naming them. And I've noticed students whose documentation reflects the wrong name. And I think this is particularly becoming a problem as we move to online learning, because I did have last spring, when, if anyone recalls that wild semester when we were in person and then we moved online halfway through, I had a trans student, and her documentation had the wrong name on it, but it was never an issue. On the first day, I actually always call people by their last name, and I ask them to introduce themselves with their preferred first name. So we don't run into that problem. However, when we got forced to move online, our class was meeting on Blackboard Collaborate, and that meant that her documented name was showing up, and it was dead naming her when she joined class. I don't know the logistics of the situation, so I don't want to pretend I do, but if there were a way to address that, I really think we should. In the meantime, to make do with the situation, I sent her the guest link, and I suggested she join that way because she can type her name in. But yeah, that's just something I wanted to kind of call attention to.
Thank you so much for all of that. I know, yeah, please add, please.
It's not for me, but a pair of mine, they're trans, and we were in class together. This was pre-COVID, before we transferred online in the middle. And the professor was calling out everyone's name, and my friend was dead named. But my friend corrected the professor, and the professor was so understanding and immediately scribbled out the name and wrote, okay, I'm gonna make sure and get this right, and wrote her name, and continues to this day call her the right name. And I thought it was really sweet. And she understood too. When my pair talked about it, she related. She's like, I understand. It's okay. No worries. I got it. And it was really comforting for me to hear that, to see that.
That's excellent. I'm so glad that's how that conversation went. And kudos to all involved, right? But I also think I really hear what Emily's saying too, which is we don't ever want to get in that situation to begin with. Right? Because your friend felt comfortable correcting the professor, and the professor was wonderful about it, but we can see a situation in which someone wouldn't feel comfortable speaking up,
I
right?
don't
And
think,
then,
yeah,
yeah, that would be really hard, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So if we can find a way as a school, right, as an institution, to try to make sure that we don't ever have dead names on rosters, that we, don't ever have dead names on technology, that would just be one less barrier to somebody feeling comfortable and supported. Would that be safe to say? What else do we need to change? What else have you run into that's been problematic in some way here at RCC?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I really like the idea of calling people by their last name and letting them introduce themselves. I have not experienced that, and I think that would have been really helpful when I started at RCC, because my legal name was still my dead name, and so I got called that a lot in the first days of classes and stuff like that, and that was it was not fun. So I really like that idea. I hadn't thought of it myself, but I like that. I think that something that some professors can do better is to, if they are covering LGBT topics in their lesson plans, they should regularly be required to update those lesson plans on what new stuff that we know about those specific topics. I have had experiences with professors who taught really outdated stuff about trans identities in class. And I think that that can be very harmful to trans people, and also teaches incorrect information to people who may not know anything about trans people. I think that that's an issue.
Really great point. Thank you so much, Jordan. Other perspectives on this? Go ahead.
So before, when I was reading this question, I did a little bit of research because there was a lot of things about RCC that I didn't know, right? So I wanted to see what other things other colleges are doing and what things RCC could do to make LGBTQ more friendly, right? I did find that RCC is one of the best schools for LGBTQ students to attend, according to Campus Pride Index. They gave it 3 out of 5 stars, right? Which is incredible. But there were still a few things that I felt that needed to change, right? For example, there was like actively recruiting and retaining LGBTQ students similar to other targeted populations, such as participating in an admission fair targeted towards LGBTQ prospective college students, right? Offering annual scholarships specifically for LGBTQ students. I received a scholarship back in 2019 when I was attending Baruch that was specifically for undocumented LGBTQ students from the Stonewall Foundation. And it was one that completely changed my educational path because I was working full-time and going to school full-time. And when I received that scholarship, I was able to involve myself more in my education. And these are things that can truly change a person's life. Also back in 2017, my first year at RCC, there was an annual lavender or rainbow graduation, right? And I remember that, but I don't know if it's still going on, but those are things that can make LGBTQ people more welcome. I also found that on the SUNY website, there's a part that highlights services and programs towards LGBTQ, but I did not find it on RCC's website, which is something that many people might look at in order to see which school they want to attend to, right? There was such as maybe like I know some people were saying like include LGBTQ topics in the curriculum, or create, I never took these courses, so I don't know if they exist, but I know some people talked about some courses that focus on queer studies and queer theory that could be more advertised in campus.
Those are all wonderful ideas, Jose. Thank you.
That just
Anybody else?
made me want to say that I've been working on sort of drawing up a proposal for a queer theory course. So I'm happy, Jose, that you brought that up.
That's so exciting. Yay. Oh, good. Excellent. So I also, Asad, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm outside, it's freezing. So I think that throughout history, queer voices have been and queer work has been kind of oppressed and diminished quite a bit. And if people who have contributed to, whatever field that we teach or we learn in, science, English, whatever it is, they're either hidden or altogether removed from, our history books or whatever. I think it would be such a huge, it's a lot of work, but a huge service to start to incorporate and elevate more queer voices in our curriculums and in our lesson plans. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's very important, right? And it's not that hard to do. It can happen in any class. As you said, it can happen in a science class. It can happen in a math class, right? Any class to just tie that in. Wonderful. So I want to open things up to our audience. We have a wonderful audience here. Thank you again for making the time today. What questions do you have? And you can type your question in the chat to everyone, or if you'd like, you may unmute and ask your question. We've got a wonderful group here. Anybody have any questions for us today? If you think of one, feel free to unmute and to type in the chat. I have another question that I've been keeping to see if we could slide it in. So there has been a recent poll, a Gallup poll, that indicates that more people in Gen Z identify as LGBTQ+ than in any other generation. What are your all thoughts on that, right? So essentially the implication is that there are more people who, have discovered this kind of part of themselves, who are acknowledging it, who are out about it. What does that mean for us? What do you think?
I think that more people are comfortable with coming out. I think that it's more accepted than it used to be, even though we still have a ways to go. It is definitely more accepted to be a member of the LGBT community now than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So I think that it speaks to people being more comfortable being themselves, because there always have been queer people. I mean, you can look at history and you can find just an endless amount of queer people, but a lot of it, just gets kind of swept under the rug. So yeah, I think people are just more comfortable being themselves.
Wonderful. Other thoughts about what this means for us? I'm very excited personally. Go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, I think that kind of piggybacking off of what Jordan said, there's not, I don't think that there are more like queer or transgender or like LGBTQ two-spirit people. I think that people are finally able to come out again because of our society and like being so restrictive in the past. Also on kind of a like harder, something more difficult to talk about, we have lost many of our elders due to like the AIDS pandemic and stuff. So like when people talk about that, that's something that happened, and that's a tragedy and a really sad thing, which still happens, but we've gotten very good at like healthcare has improved so much, which is a great thing. But for people who, some people say like, well, it's just like a trend or it's not real, like people, whatever the criticisms may be. I would just bring that about that to be a little more sensitive, because sometimes we don't have as many of those elders that we can look up to. So we kind of have to keep forging ahead ourselves.
You make a wonderful point about the importance of, putting queer history out there and acknowledging the times where, the infrastructures around us, the institutions around us has failed that community, and the AIDS crisis is one of them, right? This virus that it turns out can be terribly damaging to anybody, but because it was associated with gay men in particular, it was swept under the rug. It was pushed aside for far too long, and that is important to remember and learn from, and also to acknowledge the great loss that we all have suffered as a result of that. Thank you so much. Yeah. We have a couple of great questions in the chat, but I want to hold space. Does anybody else have anything else they want to say about Gen Z, this up and coming trend of more people being out? Oh, go ahead, Jose.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna add this thing that I think that now with the pandemic and everybody being online, I think that there's a lot of support that people can find on social media, right? There's a lot of support on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, a lot of groups that specifically are teenagers still finding their identities, and with more people being more open to coming out and more comfortable to coming out, even if their parents are, don't want them or don't want them to be gay or part of the LGBTQ community, there's a lot of support online that they might find now that more people are becoming open basically to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you also raised a great point, which is as people come out younger, there are some risks associated with that. Because if you come out and your family is not supportive and you are not financially independent, that adds many layers of stress and challenge to your life, right? Whereas if you're coming out when you are financially independent, you have some options in case your family isn't supportive. So one of the potential, not downsides, but I think things we need to watch out for is how to make sure we're supporting people who come to RCC already out who may be having those tensions with their family, and we need to find a way to help them through that so they can get an education, so that they can move forward and be independent and find a better situation, right? Asad, I see that you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, to one of Jose's points, I think another benefit of being online and being so kind of closely tied to social media is that young people and many older people also get another perspective on other cultures where there are space for other gender expression. Every society has their own issues, but things are done so differently around the world, and throughout history have been done so differently than what we've experienced here. And sometimes it feels like ours is the only way, or ours has been the only way, but the fact is that that's not true, and it will not remain the same either. So.
Great point. And to think about all the ways we can learn from each other throughout time, throughout space, right? How can we learn to continue to do the best job we can of supporting each other? Great. So I want to speak to Dr. Hickey's question in the chat first, because I think it's a relatively simple answer. And I'm going to ask my audience for help here, because I've been at RCC for 10 years. I have never received safe zone training specifically, but I believe that it was done at some point, maybe before I arrived. I arrived in 2010. Does anybody remember if safe zone training was done, this specific, actually the official training?
So we did offer safe zone training through the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning to a small cohort of employees, primarily faculty. Katie, if you've been here for 10 years, and I'm guessing it was 10 to 12 years ago, we did it once. It was well received. It was costly, and I think that was the initial hurdle to doing it again, but it's something that we've been talking about doing again.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So now we have an answer to that question. So this now is for the panel. What advice would you give to queer students who are about to start, right? So when you think about yourself as you were about to start RCC, what advice do you wish you'd had? What advice would you give forward?
I think that I would let people know that you shouldn't be afraid to look for people that you can talk to at college, especially at RCC. There are a lot of different professors and other members of RCC staff that you can go talk to, as well as counseling. And like at my first 2 semesters of college, I didn't talk to like anybody, not even my professors, because I was really shy. But there's a lot of wonderful people that you can talk to if you need advice, or if you just need someone to talk to, you need help with anything at college. There's a lot of resources and people you can reach out to.
Great, I'm glad to hear it. Go ahead, Asad.
I think a lot of, especially young queer people, are asked to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of educating people and kind of holding up the banner and to do a lot of the work that needs to be done surrounding queer issues, I suppose. But sometimes that can put people in a really difficult position to kind of constantly have to either come out or to explain something that's very difficult. I think it's about sometimes acknowledging that our allies and people who don't necessarily identify as LGBTQ, it's important for them to also kind of take up a bit of the mantle and a bit of the work that a lot of queer people are struggling to do, and to also kind of give ourselves that break to acknowledge that, you know, sometimes it's not in our ability to, you know, educate everyone and everything about everything, you know.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to ask a quick question real quick. You can either wave at us or you can actually raise your hand if you want to. At any point during your entire college experience, were you ever asked to speak on behalf of all queer people everywhere? Did anybody ever ask you to do that? Okay, a few people. Yeah. So maybe, you know, let's not do that, right? Like, audience, let's not ask our queer students to speak for all queer people everywhere, because they can't. And it's also a very uncomfortable position to be put in. So, you know, that's important, right? You can speak from your experience, you can speak to some of the research you've heard and what you've heard from others, but none of us in any minority can speak for all that entire minority. And that's really important to remember. Excellent. Anything else that you want to add to the advice question? Any other pieces of advice you'd give your younger self or someone coming into RCC?
I would say, if you don't want to come out yet, don't. That's your choice. You'll decide when that's going to happen, if that's going to happen, etc. That's you. No one can tell you when to do that. So if you're not quite there yet, that doesn't mean you're any less of that identity. It doesn't mean that you need to do it soon, or you're not like you're some type of imposter. You do it when you're ready. The other thing, which is sort of going off what Jordan already mentioned, I think just use the time in college to seek spaces that make you feel safe. I know we've already talked about some of the great things that have happened at RCC that made us feel comfortable. And our Inklings Club, you can sort of speak to that. We had a lot of LGBT people in there, which was really, you know, that was a space that I know I would have felt safe in if I had come out. And when I went to Fordham, the debate team was like, we were pretty much all LGBTQ. I don't know how it happened, but it did. And it was so comfortable, like our parties and everything, like those experiences are when I was like, okay, I'm building this like solid foundation where if you don't have your, like some people call it like your gay family, like if you don't have that, or a trans family or a space for you that feels comfortable, sort of this could be a time where you look for that in college. But again, only when you feel that it's safe and comfortable for you to do so.
I love that advice. Thank you so much. You know, the idea of family of choice is so important, especially in this context, I think. I know we're coming up on our time, so we end at 4 o'clock today. And you know, anybody want to say something that they haven't had a chance to say? Oh, and I see Professor Maloney has a question or a comment. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, she, her, and thank you, Dr. Lynch, and hello, Asud. Good, lovely to see you. I just really want to thank you all for your courage and your stories. I've worked my whole life has been about arts and education, and we like to think we have this huge umbrella or tent, as they like to say today. But I've learned that there's more I need to do or want to do, and I really appreciate Marie talking about those elders, because that was I lost so many of those elders. They were my friends and my family, and it was a very poignant an emotional point that I was happy to hear you bring up. But arts and education, there's a lot of great ideas that you have given me, all of you. I have a journey and I'm looking forward to it. And I thank you for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being here. Anybody have any other last words they'd like to say before we close? I want to post something in the chat. You know, this is Women's History Month, and we're also very grateful to the Women's History Month Committee for allowing us to be essentially a part of their activities for this month. One other activity, and Jordan, you could speak to this one, is the Spectrum Art Exhibit. I've just put a link to that in our chat. Jordan, you've got a piece in there, at least one, right? A couple?
Yeah, I have two, and I helped curate it. It is a wonderful exhibit. I highly recommend everybody to check it out. We are having an opening for it tomorrow. And there is a lot of beautiful art that was submitted by students and alumni from RCC. So you should definitely check it out.
Worth checking out. Yeah, it's going to run for about a few months, I believe, at that link. Good. And then on the 9th, so a week from yesterday, there is going to be a Teaching Inclusively and Equitably panel that is comprised of staff members and faculty members. And we'll be talking about teaching and some of the techniques. I know that Emily brought some up, some of the techniques we can use in the classroom, in our interactions with students, for how to be as inclusive and supportive as possible. And we wanted to have the student and alumni panel first so that we could essentially hear you and then adjust our own, presentation as a result of that. So thank you again, Asad, Jordan, Jose, Emily, Marie, and Matt. Thank you so much. It's true, you're courageous, you're eloquent, you give so much of yourselves. It's deeply appreciated and honored. So thank you everyone who attended today. I also appreciate you, and I know we all do. Stay safe, okay?